I'm gonna think about it. But I think about a lot of things. Well, the lieutenant governor has really been a great support. He thinks it would be a great idea if I would resign and run for the presidency.
Well, welcome back to Session 11. Taking on Governor Perry's possible presidential run, we turn to our On Politics panel this morning. The voice of Robert Wood can be heard in every corner of Texas. He's the Capitol correspondent for the Texas State Network, and his reports are heard here in Austin on KLBJ AM. Kate Alexander is a reporter for the Austin American Statesman. John Reynolds, a reporter for the Quorum Report. And, of course, Josh is here with us. A lot of Republicans saying this session will help bolster Perry's plans to run for president if he does indeed run. What do you think?
I think the budget's going to help him. Certainly, he's shown that he can cut a budget by $15 billion. That's going to look good in the eyes of the Tea Party Republicans, the more conservative faction, and those are the people who get out and vote in primaries. And so that point will certainly help him. I haven't seen a whole lot that's going to hurt him. I mean, he didn't get everything he wanted this session, but then again, he got enough to say this was a good session, and he got enough to claim victory at the end of the session, which is tomorrow.
Yeah, it was a tough budget.
It was indeed, yeah. Yeah, they started with very little money to work with, and the budget has improved, but not as much as people think it has.
The governor had to agree to dip into the rainy day fund to pay the current fiscal budget. Right. How did that work?
That worked just fine in the end. The Senate had wanted to go a little farther so they could use the rainy day fund for some of the spending in the upcoming budget, but the House wouldn't go along with it, and Perry was pretty adamant against on that as well. So they ended up sticking with just covering the bills for the current year.
And that was really the open question going into this session, is that we knew there would be no new taxes, but how they dealt with the rainy day fund was a big question. And once they did that deal where you just dealt with the rainy day fund for the current shortfall deficit, then that really resolved all the questions, which made kind of the proceedings of the last 2 weeks a little bit by the numbers.
And one of the things I keep hearing about, you know, and even we heard Jim Pitts mention this before, that maybe Perry has had a little bit more involvement in the budgeting process this time. And I know in the past week we've seen a lot of closed-door sessions, and he's been back there, you know, with Strauss and Dewhurst and Ogden and Pitts, just working out everything that was going to happen the last bit of the budget. I mean, is that what you're seeing, more Perry this time around?
I think he set the terms of the budget when he said there would be no new taxes, when there would be no rainy day fund for the next budget. He's come in at the end to sort of be a closer. You heard him on last week going into the school finance debates. He walked in, he's like, let's get her done. So he was there at the end to sort of make a difference.
Yeah, and I don't think you saw much of a difference from his normal management style. You know, there's no reason for him as governor to get too involved in the nitty-gritty of, you know, what percent cuts you do here, percent cuts over there. And you're right, he was able to come in at the end, and he's able to claim credit for what he calls a balanced budget here, and he gets to move forward.
Do you think if he wouldn't have been so, I guess, pushy, for lack of a better word, that school finance wouldn't have gotten wrapped up this week?
And of course, we're not wrapped up with it yet. We still have a vote today. Almost. That vote today is going to be real interesting, though.
Yeah, Robert has a point. Yeah.
I think it's going to be kind of close. I think they have the votes to pass it. Also, you have to realize that this is really the last day they can do it without suspending a whole bunch of rules tomorrow, and that makes it wide open for a Senate filibuster. And so there's a lot of interesting dynamics that are going into the school finance debate coming up later today. It should be very interesting to watch.
And there was Garnett Coleman earlier in the week talking about the controller can't certify this because it's basically fuzzy math.
Yeah, that's what he thinks. And he was saying on the House floor yesterday that, you know, we could come back next session and see a $20 billion deficit. Now, on the Senate side, Steve Ogden says maybe more like $4 or $5 billion, and the good thing is we've got enough money in the rainy day fund now because we didn't spend it this time to cover $4 or $5 billion if that's the kind of shortfall we have next time. It depends on who you believe and whose math you believe.
Right, and what Garnett said was really interesting because it kind of points as to what the next few months are going to bring. We're seeing a pivot point here now where People who observe the budget closely are going to now move toward what will the effects of this budget be. We have numbers now. The next few months will tell the tale as far as whether or not we have doctors in the pipeline, because they had cuts on, for instance, on residency slots. We need a lot of doctors in this state, and so that remains to be seen. And you'll also see things, whether or not the cuts to mental health services, what that means. And so Garnett and the Democrats for sure will be watching this closely, and so will other groups.
You guys have gotten any feedback on the numbers that came out yesterday for the school finance cuts, that the less money that they can expect for the next 2 years?
Well, they're not as bad as what schools had initially anticipated. If you remember, Austin was anticipating something like a $94 million reduction this coming year. They're now looking at, what is it,
37 this first year, 58 the second year.
Yeah, so it's not as bad as it had been initially anticipated. So the first year, they're just going to cut across the board. And then the next year, they start shifting more of the reduction to the schools that have been doing better under the current school finance system.
Republicans are claiming victory on not having draconian cuts with the nursing homes. And how did rural hospitals and the nursing homes fare in your view?
Well, it's an interesting question because hospitals actually do have a rate cut, and nursing homes where that was the nursing homes and schools. Those were the third rails this session, and the legislators did not want to get close to those. And the 10% cut was rolled back. There are still cuts that were in place earlier that remain, and so there will be some pain there. But yes, they feel like they averted the absolute worst of it. And it's interesting as well. I mean, the Republicans obviously are presenting the budget as something where we saved a lot of pain, and they talked again about a $5.8 billion increase for public ed. Jim Pitt said that yesterday on the floor. But of course, when you talk about going from 9.8 billion cuts to 4 billion cuts, well, the eye of the beholder, I guess.
And one thing, I guess, too, for this, going back to the school districts, is, John, on your site this morning, you guys said that a lot of the school districts planned on the Senate numbers, and that's what we ended up with. And so it's not like they're taken by surprise. They've kind of been planning on the Senate numbers ever since the Senate budget came out. That's what they ended up going with, so that's a little bit better for the local school districts. It kind of moderates the hit. They know they're going to take a hit, but they are kind of ready for it. They're more ready for it than they could have been.
Sanctuary cities, that did not go as the governor had hoped.
No, it's kind of the one thing that the Democrats were successful in doing this session, in blocking. A lot of other things, they found ways to circumvent the rules and get around things and use the rules in their advantage as far as the Republicans go, use their big numbers to get things through. But in this particular instance, sanctuary cities, the Democrats in the Senate especially, were successful in blocking it. And I guess that's the one thing the governor can say I didn't get out of this session, was the sanctuary cities issue. Even though it was an emergency, it could have been done early, went down to the last minute and died.
But of course, he also can do it. He can try again.
That's true. We may be back here in July, don't you think?
It's looking more like it. And it's interesting, again, you point out how it didn't get out of the Senate. And if one thing we saw in the last few weeks, the institution of the Senate reasserted they have the two-thirds rule, and it was not circumvented for sanctuary cities. It was not circumvented for windstorm insurance as well, which is an issue that emerged out of nowhere in the last week, and also could be a reason why we'll be back in the summer.
Now, the thing is, they could have circumvented the rules to do sanctuary cities. It was certainly possible, but they chose not to. The only time they circumvented the rules twice in the Senate this session, first for voter ID and then for the budget, to make sure it passed, because the Democrats they did not want to vote for this budget. And in fact, through the entire process, I think only one Democrat voted one time for the budget, and that was yesterday when Juan Hinojosa voted for the budget in the Senate.
Well, Craig Island voted on the House side.
Craig Island voted on the House side.
Lawsuit reform.
It passed, right? Didn't it? Some form of it?
A form of it.
A form.
Yeah.
It wasn't as tough as they wanted. I mean, it's not a true loser pays, is it? The final version of it, it was moderated quite a bit over in the Senate to get the votes.
Yeah, not anymore. And on the windstorm insurance, but I think it's also appropriate to this loser pays discussion, because they're both tort reform issues. Somebody told me yesterday that he was talking about the holdup being in the Senate, and then he said, well, the thing about the Senate is they believe in agreed upon bills. And so that tends to moderate the impact of any legislation. And so for people who are pushing for a stronger form of tort reform, the Senate has proven to be an obstacle.
But in the end, the loser pays, which really wasn't a loser pays anymore, passed the Senate 31-0. So they came to a pretty strong agreement over that.
But if you have tort reformers and trial lawyers both claiming victory, I guess that tells you a little something about what it means.
Yeah.
Nobody loses, nobody pays.
Yeah, not much.
A lot of talk at the beginning of the session, throughout the session, a lot of advertising online popped up about let's have casino gambling in Texas, and that one
Boy.
died.
Yeah. It didn't go anywhere, did it? And the supporters figured that this is kind of the best session we've had since 1995 to get this going because of the budget crisis. And we can come in there and say, look, we're going to give you $2 or $3 billion. You can use it for education. It'll help you out. And then it just went nowhere. I think part of it is because of the makeup of the legislature now, and it is so strongly Republican, and historically Republicans don't like to expand gambling. It just doesn't help them out at the ballot box among their base come primary time.
Still, the specter of gambling was there throughout the session. I mean, you even heard talk of it in just the last couple of weeks of the session, that it could pop up just suddenly, and so it's still there, and it will continue to be there.
And you know, and this is an object lesson into why Texas politics, Texas democracy is so interesting. The mechanics of how to pass a bill are lined up toward failure. I mean, it's really, really hard to pass a bill. And a deal like gambling, which is so complex, there are so many interested parties that you have to negotiate something that everybody can be happy with. And this is an issue that has cropped up in every session that I've covered, and they've never really come really close.
And it's one everyone has a strong opinion about.
Oh, yeah.
You can understand. Well, we want to thank you all for coming in.
You bet.
Appreciate hearing what's going on at the Capitol, and we're going to come back with more of Session 11 here on KXAN right after this.
Good